I don't like the word victim. I don't like the word suffering. It's all too inadequate. But in terms of courage and endurance and experience, there's really nobody, I don't think, has been in this room who knows what Jineth knows.
Jineth Bedoya Lima built her career in Colombia as a reporter seeking out tough assignments and going to great lengths to uncover the truth.
Few journalists are as tough as Jineth Lima. For 3 decades, she has been uncovering the nasty ties between the legal and the illegal, between the Colombian government and its cartels. Corruption is a monster that is allowing cartels to flourish in many countries around the world. And without people like Jineth, the monster only grows. But Jineth has been through literal hell while uncovering corruption in Colombia. Twice. Her story tells a tale of shocking courage, but also shows the darkest corners of the Colombian government. Let's explore the full story of Jineth Bedoya Lima, the journalist who brought down cartels and showed the government for who they really are. In 2000, Jineth Bedoya Lima was 26 years old. She was working for the daily newspaper El Espectador in Bogotá, Colombia. Jineth lived in a country where Pablo Escobar was once hailed a hero. He was long gone, and so was his Medellin cartel, but other monsters lurked in the shadows. Colombia was ridden with narcotics cartels, paramilitary groups, and corrupt officials who allowed these groups to flourish. Violence was the norm in many areas of Colombia thanks to these groups, and Jineth had made it her life mission to shed light on corruption and try and put an end to violence. In 1999, an attempt was made on Jineth and her mother's lives. But as they both escaped unscathed, Jineth was not going to back down. In 2000, she was working with Ignacio Gomez, another journalist known for his high-risk reporting of corruption and paramilitary groups. Jineth and Ignacio were covering the Colombian war against terrorism. In her research, Jineth stumbled on a worrying piece of information. There was arms trafficking committed by both state officials and a far-right paramilitary group called the United Self-Defense Forces of Colombia. Jineth's work was no secret to the Colombian government, but as it turns out, it had made its way to the paramilitary group too. In May, a convicted killer known as the Baker invited Jineth to the Bogotá La Modelo prison, where he was being held. He promised to give her all the information she needed on the arms trafficking story. He would help her expose the ties between the legal and illegal world, he said. She would complete her research in a day. It all sounded too good to be true, and Jineth knew this could be a trap. So she rallied up 2 men to come with her to the interview, an editor and a photographer. But the 3 of them did not consider that the prison guards would be part of the trap. When they entered the prison, the guards guided the 2 men to a room for a brief clearance protocol. At least that's what they said. The plan was simple. Separate the men from Jineth so she could disappear. It all went down in a matter of seconds. Nobody even heard screams. Jineth was seized, drugged, and shoved into a car by 3 men. She was then driven to another location several hours away, where she was subjected to unspeakable things.
In 2000, she got too close to uncovering an arms smuggling ring involving government prison officials and imprisoned paramilitary leaders. She was kidnapped, driven 2 hours out of Bogotá, raped, bound, and thrown into a garbage dump.
That's not even all. She was beaten so badly that she could not move her body. When they threw her next to a garbage dump, Jineth was only half conscious and unable to leave. She was convinced she would die in a few hours. Through nothing short of a miracle, a taxi driver drove past Jineth and saw her. He immediately brought her into his car and drove her to the nearest hospital. Jineth, although close to death, could perfectly remember her abuser's words.
Pay attention, she was told by her abusers. We are sending a message to the press in Colombia.
They also told Jineth that they planned to cut her colleague Ignacio Gomez into little pieces. 6 days after the incident, Ignacio fled Colombia temporarily. However, Jineth did not back down. Wait, what? You'd expect most journalists going through something as horrific as this to leave their careers and maybe even the country. But Jineth was only more determined to arrest these criminals and expose corruption in Colombia. If it wasn't for corruption, she wouldn't have been snatched from the prison in the first place. Only because of the guards was the paramilitary group leader able to do this to her. As soon as she was able to function normally, Jineth was back at it. In 2001, she was hired by El Tiempo and put in charge of its law enforcement coverage. This included reporting on paramilitary groups and their crimes. Now, Jineth started investigating another one, called the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, of FARC. FARC was nothing short of evil. For more than a year, they had forced the entire town of Puerto Alvira into full-time white powder production. The town had about 100 inhabitants, and they were practically made slaves for this cartel. For Jineth, this was an urgent matter, and she had to be on site to report on it. So she took a small team and traveled to Puerto Alvira with a camera. But as soon as they made it into the town, the leader of the FARC guerrillas ordered the abduction of Jineth and her photographer. They stripped them of their clothing, cameras, and equipment, and shoved them into a horrific place. The leader also ordered his men not to speak with Jineth and her photographer, and not to feed them either. But here's the thing. Jineth was a hero to the people of Puerto Alvira. They knew she was there to shed light on what was happening to them, and, eventually, to free them from the clutches of FARC. So despite the FARC's orders, Puerto Alvira locals kept coming to where Jineth and her photographer were kept with food and clothing. Some locals also tried to alert the Red Cross of the incident. A local priest also warned them that the FARC was planning to take Jineth and her photographer into a forest and take their lives. While the Red Cross did not move fast enough, someone else did. To everyone's surprise, it was the regional FARC commander who set Jineth and her photographer free. They had been tied, starved, and attacked for 8 days. The commander even apologized for the local FARC leader who ordered their abduction. The commander offered to reimburse the two for their lost cameras and equipment, but Jineth refused. This would have meant being potentially indebted to a criminal group, and they tend to use these things as leverage. So Jineth and the photographer were better off without any ties to FARC. It was a couple of townspeople who alerted the FARC commander of the situation, leading to Jineth's release. After all was said and done, Jineth wrote a story on the living conditions in FARC-controlled territory, but she did not name any of the locals who helped her, fearing for their lives if she did. For many people in Colombia, it was shocking that Jineth was only growing in courage and determination after going through literal hell twice. For many others, it demonstrated a heroic attitude that needed to be awarded.
Jineth would not be silenced. Instead, she built on her work as an investigative journalist and demanded justice in her own case. She has become an outspoken advocate, shining a light on issues of sexual violence and denouncing criminals who think they can operate with impunity. For your unfailing courage, determination, and perseverance while fighting for justice and speaking out on behalf of victims of sexual violence in Colombia, all women and girls are in your debt. Thank you.
On March 8, 2012, Jineth Lima was awarded an International Women of Courage Award by Hillary Clinton and former First Lady Michelle Obama. The list goes on. In 2000, Jineth received the CJFE International Press Freedom Award, and in 2001, the Courage in Journalism Award, both following the horrific 2000 incident. In 2020, Jineth went on to receive 2 more huge awards, the UNESCO World Press Freedom Prize and the Golden Pen of Freedom Award. Wait, what's that about the Golden Pen? Well, Jineth not only stuck to high-risk journalism all this time, but she became a devoted activist speaking out against SA as a warfare tactic in Colombia. Sadly, she is not the first or the last woman to go through this type of unimaginable hell at the hands of cartels and paramilitary groups. In 2009, Jineth started a campaign called "It Is Not Time to Be Silent" to defend women's rights in Colombia. For years, she kept her harrowing experiences to herself, but in 2009, she broke her silence when she launched the campaign "No es hora de callar," "It is not time to be silent," to defend women's rights and denounce the habitual and systematic impunity in cases of sexual violence within Colombia's internal war. Juan Ifra said the Golden Pen of Freedom Award recognizes Ms. Bedoya Lima's dedication to the profession of journalism, her tireless work in promoting and protecting the rights of women, and her courage in confronting and overcoming her own personal tragedy with a level of dignity and determination that serves as an inspiration to peers the world over. When she accepted the award, Jineth said, "This award is the greatest encouragement and support that a journalist can receive. Working for press freedom is one of the greatest commitments that a media outlet and a journalist can have, and being awarded the Golden Pen of Freedom is also recognition of the tireless fight against impunity that dozens of journalists face around the world." Jineth also added that she did not keep quiet for years because of trauma, but because the government simply did not recognize these crimes. No one wanted to look into it or even talk about it. When I wanted to pursue my own case and contacted the police hospital for the evidence, it had all been destroyed. Imagine how devastating it is, after going through something like this, to find out authorities are protecting the criminals, not the victim. Authorities in Colombia seem either fearful of paramilitary groups and cartels, or actively working together with them. So how can there be any justice for all the victims who don't know who to contact for help? Can you even ask for help in a corrupt world where anyone can rat on you to the cartels? In Jineth's case, her efforts were not in vain. As soon as the 2000 incident happened, as soon as she was out of the hospital, she started a case against the Colombian government. She was a journalist working for the betterment of the government. She was in a government-owned prison. This should not have happened. Inmates should not have the power to snatch someone, and prison guards should not be in cahoots with them. As far as Jineth and thousands of others were concerned, the government was responsible. Slowly but surely, there were results. In May 2011, a paramilitary soldier was arrested and confessed to being one of the 3 kidnappers. The following year, Colombia's public prosecutor's office finally announced that Jineth's experience was a crime against humanity. And in July 2019, the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights confirmed Jineth as a victim and declared the Colombian state responsible for the acts committed against her. Jineth thus became the first victim to bring an SA case in Colombia to an international tribunal. A full 2 decades after it all happened, she became known as a heroic figure for women around the globe, shining light on an issue still prevalent in so many places. President of the World Editors Forum, Warren Fernandez said, "Ms. Bedoya Lima's conviction and courage is a shining inspiration at a time when journalists, women, and minorities are under such great threat of violence, oppression, and discrimination around the world. In speaking truth to power, in your pursuit of justice and drive to bring impunity to an end, you represent the very best of our profession." In 2016, Jineth was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize for her work in the defense of women's rights. Speaking against gender violence and impunity in Colombia, she highlighted a centuries-old problem and showed there is hope in ending it.
I don't like the word victim. I don't like the word suffering. It's all too inadequate. But in terms of courage, and endurance, and experience, there's really nobody, I don't think, has been in this room who knows what Jineth.
Jineth became an internationally recognized figure, appearing in many interviews and explaining what she believes her role is today. A translator spoke for her in English.
I consider myself to be the voice and perhaps the face of millions of women who have been violated in Colombia. I'm here for them, and when you see my face, I hope that you will also see their faces.
She explained how she changed from the start of her career in the late 1990s.
When I was young, I wanted to absorb the whole of the world. I was a young reporter going out on the streets, looking for stories. I had dreams and I had goals, and all of that died on the 25th of May, 2000.
Jineth also explained that, as she continued her research past her horrific experiences, she discovered just how intertwined Colombia's government and army were, with extremist paramilitary groups who wreaked havoc on the country and its innocent people. Where there is money to be made, the government will get involved, and who makes more money and faster than cartels? Sadly, this is not a problem that will be solved with one article or even one journalist's life work.
So Colombia has been living in an internal armed conflict for over 60 years now. And there's a group of the extreme left, the guerrillas of the extreme left, and on the extreme right, the paramilitaries. And we have the armed forces, which in large part is responsible for the growth of the paramilitaries.
In both arms trafficking and kidnapping, high-ranking politicians were involved and were profiting off of it. So when Jineth was snatched, subjected to hell, and warned that this was a message for the press, this was a message coming from the government too. They didn't want their corruption exposed. They would rather silence innocent people than risk an end to their profitable business, if we can call it a business. For the last decade or more, Jineth has been traveling through Colombia in a bulletproof car, surrounded by a large group of bodyguards. These were ordered by the Colombian government itself, years after Jineth started the case against them. It was a minor apology for what had happened, and an attempt to keep her safe from future threats. Jineth said it's refreshing to walk in any other country, where no one knows her and where she doesn't have to fear for her life on a regular basis.
That's my life, that's what I've chosen, and it's the way I want to carry on living. The worst that could have happened to me in my life has already happened. There's nothing that can be worse than to be, as a woman, than to be humiliated and outraged in the way that I was humiliated and outraged. And I still live under threat, but what's the worst they can do to me? Kill me, and I'm prepared.
It's incredible to hear Jineth Lima talk so fearlessly after all this time, still as determined as ever to fight for what's right. She is proof that cartels don't always get what they want with threats and violence. They can intimidate some people, but not all. And those on the side of justice will always eventually win against those on the side of evil. Today, the Colombian government has been ordered to investigate and prosecute those involved in the 2000 incident against Jineth, and to protect female journalists from SEA in the context of armed conflict. Jineth has made Colombia a safer place for women and showed the world that even governments can be held accountable for crimes. She is not the only female journalist who's shown superhuman courage and resilience over the last few decades. With Jineth comes a whole generation of journalists prepared to go to any lengths to expose evil and curb corruption for good. Hey, thanks for watching. What are your thoughts on this story? Do you know other stories of tough journalists? Let me know in a comment. And before you go, make sure you like and subscribe. See you next time.